If you asked a wrestling fan what match they would show somebody who had never seen wrestling before, oftentimes the answer would be this. Mick Foley is without question one of the most captivating characters in the annals of professional wrestling history. A kid from New York with big dreams, he spent years sleeping in his car or on gym floors, taking all the bumps, all the injuries, spilling all that blood for a chance at immortality. He shocked fans as Cactus Jack in WCW and ECW, mutilated himself in Japan and Germany, and took his career to new heights once he came to the World Wrestling Federation as Mankind. After creating some of the most incredible moments in the company's history, Foley finally earned his place in that rarefied air among the biggest and most heralded legends of all time. And after all that, once your career dies down, what else do you do but move to Florida? Much like his idol Terry Funk did in the 1990s in ECW, Mick found himself at a similar crossroads when his WWE career came to an end, and decided to use his talents to reach out and bring the little guy up a couple pegs. But did Mick's efforts to help embolden the burgeoning company prove successful? We're about to find out. Put on your shabbiest flannel shirt and grab an old sweat sock out of the drawer. Oh God, not this one. As we look at Mick Foley's time in TNA. How did it even get on my hand? The story begins in the spring of 2008 in WWE, when Foley took over Jonathan Coachman's role of color commentary on SmackDown. Working alongside Michael Cole, he did as well as he could, with Vince McMahon shouting at him in the headset every week. Maybe Cole could spend a quarter of a century with Vince yelling obscenities in his ear, but considering Mick only had one good one to spare, he decided he couldn't deal with it for very long, and was written off after an on-air attack by Edge that August. At the turn of the month, Foley's working relationship with WWE ended once again. Meanwhile, as his time there was wrapping up, TNA had apparently begun planning to take their trademark X division and splitting it off from the rest of the roster, not unlike what WWE did with Raw, SmackDown, and ECW. According to Foley himself, it was originally pitched to him that he would be named the new owner of the X division, ostensibly making it his brand. Just 2 days after his WWE deal expired, Mick put ink to paper with Total Nonstop Action. His first appearance under contract, surprising fans at a Long Island house show a couple of days later, wasn't that amazing, but his television debut was, well, just as underwhelming.
Hi, Kurt, hi. You remember me?
Instead of popping the crowd with something like, oh I don't know, a live debut, that September episode of Impact concluded with a brief pre-taped message from the Micker. It's almost as if they perfectly matched my excitement and interest level when I first found out that Mick Foley was going to be in a major storyline in 2008. Don't get me wrong, I've been in love with Foley's work since I first saw him in 1998, and going back to watch his earlier stuff through this channel has only strengthened that love. But after his first retirement in 2000, I had essentially moved on. I liked his first few appearances back to the ring. I mean, those feuds with Randy Orton and Edge were incredible, but by this point Foley had only gotten older and more banged up. It was getting sadder. If TNA was hoping to capture the attention of new or lapsed fans, was this really the best way to go about it? I mean, the guy didn't even say anything original, for Pete's sake. He just copied what Kurt Angle said when he debuted.
I think what Jeff is trying to say is, it's real. It's damn real. Bang bang!
It was all done to set up Foley's involvement as the special guest enforcer for the bitter grudge match between Kurt Angle and Jeff Jarrett. In his first live promo, Foley went to great lengths to bring up his past place of employment.
I also want to go out of my way to thank someone very special, without whom this moment would not be possible, Vince McMahon, for making the decision to leave WWE, an easy one.
If you can believe it, Foley's promo isn't the only time McMahon's name is mentioned on this same episode of Impact. Earlier in the night, Jarrett pulled out a quote from a recent interview Kurt Angle had done where he praised his former boss.
Vince is the most intelligent and most successful promoter of all time. He and I have had our ins and outs, and it's almost come to blows, but we have a mutual respect.
It's tired. It's damn tired. Foley said in his promo that after calling some of the greatest matches in WWE, again, way to put the wrong company over, he needed to know if Angle was as good as he thought he was and wanted to get a closer look. At Bound for Glory in Chicago, fans saw Angle dink Foley with a steel chair, only for it to cost him in the end when Foley got up, clamped on the mandible sacco, and assisted Jarrett in winning the emotional match. On the following Impact, Foley teased that he was finally done with wrestling for good, as one often does after appearing one time at a new place. But it was all a misdirection, as the very next week, Foley was named the co-owner of TNA. Whatever plans TNA might have had for separating the X division and making Foley its kayfabe owner fizzled out. Instead, they just split the ownership and gave Mick matchmaking abilities, which of course was right up his alley. And if the last 10 years or so of wrestling had taught us anything at that point, it's that no matter the issue, the answer was always more authority figures. But I will admit, there was a little glimmer of the greatest WWF commissioner of all time in there when Foley performed in his role, especially working alongside young up-and-coming heels. X Division standout Alex Shelley had previously made fun of Foley's weight on TV, but it was the Hardcore Legend who had the last laugh on Thanksgiving night, when Shelley took the deciding fall in the first ever Turkey Bowl. As the victor, Rhino got a nice check, and for Shelley, he got to feel like Hector Guerrero for a night.
The only pro I could see coming out of this is I might get a great MySpace picture.
Oh man, I remember MySpace. You know, you could put your embedded song on the profile, you had top 8s. Good times. Around the time of Foley's debut, the Main Event Mafia officially formed and was running roughshod over the TNA roster, so much so that a group of wrestlers banded together to form the Front Line in response. Finally, at the turn of 2009, Foley had his first TNA match when he joined up with AJ Styles and Brother Devon to take on the Mafia members of Booker T, Kevin Nash, and Scott Steiner, only for Nash to drop out the last minute due to a staph infection and be replaced by Cute Kip, you know, that consummate main eventer Billy Gunn, known for all those main events he wrestled in. Foley won the match for the Front Line as he pinned Steiner in the main event. Well, I guess that does give one for Kip, so technically it counts. For the next several months, it felt like Foley was fighting other people's battles and retracing old angles, and not just WWE ones. By March at Destination X, Foley was again used as a special guest enforcer in the TNA title match with Angle and Sting, with Jarrett as the guest ref. From there, the company went full force Jeff Farmer style on moving Mick Foley from just meddling in main events to actually being in them. Remember the early 90s? Well, Mick Foley sure did, and he had an old score to settle with the man called Sting, one of his best ever WCW opponents, the reigning TNA champion, and also the sitting leader of the Main Event Mafia. The stage was set, a match for the championship within the 6 sides of steel at Lockdown. Gotta love it when wrestling's favorite broken down uncle plays the heel against the babyface who's the leader of the top heel faction. Now, whenever Mick Foley made an in-ring return, no matter how fleeting, one thing you have to respect about him was how hard he worked to get himself ready. He would cut weight, he would spend days crafting promos before cutting them live, and would fully engross himself into the role, even if it meant tapping into the Cactus Jack of old.
Say hello to Cactus Jack! You think this is funny, Mick? You think this is some kind of a joke?
Shut your mouth! Shut it! Shut it!
You are turning a 20-year friendship into an out-of-control 3-ring circus, Mick.
The first time you heard the very beginning remnants of a Cactus Jack chant, and you may not have been intimidated, but it threw you off your game.
It's obvious the Main Event Mafia out to show their support for Sting, but then...
I want to tear you apart. Have a nice day.
Okay, see, now I'm torn. I know I said earlier I didn't want to see Mick Foley kill himself in the ring considering all the obvious pain he's going through, but son of a bitch, watch that promo with he and Sting and tell me you're not invested in that match. You know, age be damned, broken bodies be damned, weird booking be damned. That is a story.
Play me a little Curry Man.
And so the two had their main event cage match, the last of 9 consecutive cage matches on the night, a streak that began with Eric Young beating Danny Bonaducci in the pre-show, and honestly, once you've peaked at the onset, why even bother doing the rest of the show? Mick clearly had something left in the tank, but that something was barely enough for a match already booked to mask both men's age and limitations. The best part came when Foley had to ask the outside cameraman he had just drop-kicked to hand him a barbed wire bat. Then the camera guy gives the business end of it to him. Revenge, I guess. The match ended with a race-to-the-floor finish, which Mrs. Foley's baby boy won in a smooth and graceful fashion, and suddenly Mick Foley was a world champion for the first time in a decade. But because the line between face and heel was so murky for both of them, and because they had just seen a ton of other exciting cage matches, this Philadelphia crowd seemed less than thrilled about this Cinderella story. I remember this happening and feeling very conflicted about it. On the one hand, I was really happy to see this wrestler that I admired growing up getting another shot at glory. At the same time though, considering where he was in his career, it felt like desperation on TNA's part. Maybe Dixie Carter figured, heck, for as much as they were paying him, putting the belt on him was the least they could do. As the mentally unstable authority figure and the world champion, Foley went back and forth from psychotic and cruel to silly and self-absorbed. On the go-home show before Sacrifice, Mick said he would fight a former world champion in the main event, which ended up being a Rocky Balboa cardboard cutout.
Could he do it? Oh, suplex! He suplexed Rocky!
That's away.
Yo, Colette! I did it!
You know, for a guy who's best known for having a multiple personality gimmick and getting a sock on his hand over, this might be the least weird thing he's ever done. That Sunday at Sacrifice, Foley and his world title were but a small portion of the smorgasbord known as the Ultimate Sacrifice match, in which all the competitors had something on the line and only the loser of the fall would suffer the consequences. Kurt Angle risked his leadership of the main event Mafia. Sting put his career on the line. Jeff Jarrett his shares of TNA. And oh yeah, Mick Foley put his World Heavyweight Championship on the line. One would think it would create a situation where everyone ganged up on Foley and not even care about beating Sting, but they didn't. In fact, when the match wasn't split off into pairs, the world champion actually sat down at commentary while the other guys kept fighting.
Well, it's getting a little hot in the kitchen, so I thought I'd take a little rest-a-rooney till things cool off, hop in there, pick up a quick victory.
Compared to his time on SmackDown, this guy had to be having the time of his life on the headset. Sting pinned Angle to solidify his status as the leader of the main event Mafia, making that seem a lot more important than the biggest accolade in the company. There had to have been a more subtle way to get that point across. Not only was the leadership of the main event Mafia more hotly contested than a world title, so was control of TNA apparently. A power struggle had formed between Foley and Jarrett, and things looked to come to a head at the King of the Mountain match at Slammiversary. I do question why they would put a guy with decades of knee and hip issues in a match where the objective was to climb a ladder to win, but to each their own. Foley would end up sitting on the sideline for the end of his own world championship reign. After he was put in the penalty box multiple times, the match ended with more Mafia drama, as Samoa Joe handed the championship over to Kurt Angle and swore allegiance to the main event Mafia. Foley used his executive power to secure himself a one-on-one rematch with Kurt at Victory Road and spent weeks on the receiving end of some Mafia beatdowns as a result. The match was built around Foley's high pain threshold and his refusal to submit except for one time his entire career. Then the bell rang and our boys didn't stand a chance. Angle was dealing with a litany of injuries and the disillusion of his family on top of that during this time. And Foley was, well, Foley. He and Angle tried their damnedest, but the odds just weren't in their favor on this night. And even though Kurt was all kinds of messed up, there was no way he was losing the match. Foley ended up tapping out after all, and Angle retained his title. Truly, it was a big moment in wrestling. Foley almost never submitted in his matches, so for him to submit to Kurt Angle no less would do wonders for Kurt's run. Although, it might have meant a lot more if Samoa Joe just didn't make Sting tap out in the previous matchup. Does anyone here know anything about pacing? Somehow I pine for that Sharmell-Jenna Maraska match from earlier in the night. Victory Road 09 was a terrible show, a depressing event where the main event Mafia took home all the gold and the fans felt ripped off over how bad most of the matches were. Foley got a little bit of payback on that week's episode of Impact though, earning a consolation prize in the form of the TNA Legends Championship. This was the result of another Vince Russo special, the tag match where one or more singles belts are on the line. Of course Foley couldn't beat Angle, but good thing Nash in this new vanity title was expendable. Foley didn't hold on to the title for long, as Nash beat him back for it at Hard Justice 1 month later. It was a bloody affair. In fact, the blood was the only thing making this match worth watching. But wouldn't you know it, the camera missed the 3 count that ended the match. Thank goodness Abyss came down after the bell to save his hardcore icon, forging an alliance between the two. Foley and Abyss fought a united front against the main event Mafia for a few weeks, but in a rematch for the Legends title on a September episode of Impact, Abyss ran in with a barbed wire bat and got his mentor DQ'd despite Abyss having never even touched Nash. The following week, the two were set to challenge Scott Steiner and Booker T for the tag belts, but that night, Foley was distracted by the fact that someone had defaced one of his most prized possessions, a drawing of him and Jeremy Borash. Oh, well, I never. Of all the low-down, dirty things for someone to do in a wrestling show, who's responsible for this catastrophe?
No, look at it, Chris. Look at it. Oh, it was... It was you, Chris!
Convinced that it was Abyss who did the unforgivable deed, Foley snapped and betrayed his big simple friend, and the crowd went mild. But in fairness, if you're gonna put Mick Foley in a feud with anyone, it might as well be the guy who, when I first saw him, I thought he was the love child of Mankind and Kane.
It's a cheap imitation. It's a ripoff. And if anyone should know about cheap imitations and ripoffs, it's you, Chris.
Unlike the Rock and Sock Connection angle when Foley turned on The Rock because he mistakenly thought Rocky threw his book into the trash, this time Abyss actually did destroy Foley's prized picture, only it was an accident. This naturally set up a dream match, or perhaps a nightmare, a monsters ball match at Bound for Glory, a hardcore war with two guys who have no problem destroying their own bodies for the fans' entertainment. Dr. Stevie, aka Michael Bateman, was in Foley's pocket as guest referee. The match had plenty of sick and twisted moments, and Daphne interfered too by offering Mick an exploding taser. There was also a kick-out botch that was apparently so bad, Impact cut it from YouTube. Daphne got chokeslammed for her troubles, Stevie went into the thumbtacks that Foley had banned Abyss from using in the first place, and then Abyss used Stevie's limp arm to count the 3 for the win. Unfortunately, that chokeslam spot gave Daphne a big ol' concussion, and wouldn't you know it, the cameras missed that spot too.
I don't know what the hell just happened, but it was nuts, and in a weird way, it was kind of cool.
Instead of continuing the feud, Foley did another about-face 2 weeks later, saving Abyss from an attack from Stevie and Daphne, as Foley revealed that he was only testing Abyss by doing all those awful things to him before. Damn, dude, whatever happened to just telling stories in the car? But the newly reunited duo were met by the returning Raven, now with fireball throwing action. Though the feud with Raven and Stevie knocked Mick a couple rungs down the ladder, at least now he was in a storyline that emphasized his strength instead of him having to go move for move with Kurt Angle. In all honesty, this is the sort of thing he should have been doing from the start, being the legendary buddy to the current star and occasionally adding star power to a big show. But need I remind you what time of year this was, where we all were in wrestling history, brother?
The one, the only, Hogan!
It was just days after Bound for Glory in October when TNA announced the signing of Hulk Hogan, and even though he wouldn't officially appear on TV until January, the company spent weeks hyping his impending arrival. Mick Foley, meanwhile, began to display paranoia about the Hogan signing, complaining that it all went down behind his back, and worried about how it could affect his status in the company. And if I didn't know any better, I would say this is almost like Jeff Jarrett expressing his real-life concerns through a proxy. In fact, the December 10th episode of Impact featured a thread of Foley on the hunt for his old frenemy in Double J in Tennessee. Jarrett, who was sent home months earlier once the real-life drama between him, Kurt Angle, and his soon-to-be ex-wife Karen blew up, was found alone drinking in a bar. Worth pointing out, this is before he went to rehab.
And I know that Double J cannot stay away from professional wrestling.
Old Double J, you're probably right. Double J can't stay away from wrestling. But Jeff Jarrett can.
It was good to see Jarrett again and get a little bit of explanation into his absence, even though most of it would have gone right over the heads of anyone not nose deep in the dirt sheets at the time. The seeds have been planted for another power struggle within TNA, and wait a minute, doesn't Foley have a pay-per-view match coming up? Yes, while all this political turmoil was going on, Final Resolution was still ahead, and Mick and Abyss had a date with Raven and Stevie in a Foley's Funhouse match. A pay-per-view running during the holiday season featuring a hardcore match with Mick Foley and not one Christmas-related weapon? TNA, you disappoint me. Foley and Abyss would win that matchup, and before long, nearly everyone in the company was girding their loins for the arrival of the Hulkster. Foley actually traveled to Los Angeles to meet the Hulk in a meeting set up by Kevin Nash. But
you need to contract the bicep more.
Lou Ferrigno?
Yes, how are you?
You are a Hulk, but I'm talking about a meeting with the real Hulk.
No. I am the Hulk.
Finally, someone did it!
Please don't get angry because I wouldn't like you when you're angry.
Then it was Monday, January 4th, the first episode of Impact to go head-to-head with Monday Night Raw. Learn all about that debacle in my recent video on the subject. Foley spent most of that landmark episode shuffling around the building, trying to get inside and look for answers, only to get assaulted by Nash, Sean Waltman, and Scott Hall at the end of the night, which led to the official formation of the band. For the next several weeks, Foley came coming for Eric Bischoff's head. On the January 21st episode of Impact, a bloody Bischoff accused Foley of beating him up off camera and fired him on the spot. Only not, because Hogan actually stood up for Foley the next week and allowed him to stay. Bischoff continued to torment Foley on the February 4th episode of Impact, threatening the careers of his good friends JB and Abyss and putting him in a no DQ match with Kevin Nash. The finish was sloppy and confusing, as Foley suddenly got distracted by that stupid framed picture of he and Borash again and was hit with a big boot for Nash to pick up the W. Man, is it just me, or does all that simping Foley did for Melina back in 2006 seem more dignified than this? Bischoff punished Foley further for his insolence, putting him in the 8-card stud tournament at Against All Odds in February for the #1 contendership against his old friend Abyss. Abyss won the match, but Eazy-E wasn't done with the hardcore legend just yet. Threatening to shave Foley's head bald, the Micker turned the tables and used the shears on Bischoff's dome instead. Here's a fun analogy for you. Eric Bischoff is to his hair as Rey Mysterio is to his mask. If you know, you know. The Bish put his two most ardent critics against each other as Foley met Jarrett in a no DQ loser leaves TNA match, which Jarrett ended up winning. The real reason for Foley's sudden departure, though, was similar to why Sting spent 18 months in the rafters in WCW. TNA was using up all his contracted appearances and needed to pull back. Fast forward to the July 15th Impact. The show ended with Foley returning to TNA along with several of his old friends. That's right, Foley was back, and this time he wasn't bringing up old WWE storylines or old WCW storylines. This time he's giving ECW a go. With ECW revivals having been all the rage 4 years earlier, TNA took a stab at it despite not having any access to the company's name or video library. EV 2.0 was born, standing for Extreme Version 2.0, which must have been way down on the list of available names that weren't trademarked by WWE. This ragtag group was actually invited by Dixie Carter, who gave them their own pay-per-view the following month, turning Hard Justice into Hardcore Justice, a night dedicated to the memory of that one company we can't mention by name.
You've never called any matches for us back in the land of extreme.
As someone who appreciates what the original organization accomplished,
the Philadelphia promotion
came in.
Living in Toronto, we didn't get a chance to watch that program until the last year.
Stop chanting those letters. You're gonna get us sued.
On that show, Foley was the guest referee for a match pitting Tommy Dreamer against Raven. The whole show was rough around the edges and for some reason very poorly lit. But considering all their restrictions, TNA actually did a pretty decent job capturing the spirit of the original ECW. A lot better than what WWE did in 2006. The following week on Impact, EV 2.0 were attacked by Ric Flair's Fortune stable, which again led us to another retread in Foley vs. Flair. Keep in mind, it wasn't the prettiest thing when these two locked up 4 years earlier, but these two decided to spill blood one more time in a last man standing match. It wound up being Foley's final match in TNA, a winning effort to boot. It was especially brutal considering the combined age and wear and tear of these warriors, both men perhaps trying to prove in vain that they still got it. As rough as the match was, you would think that it would have been scheduled for the Bound for Glory pay-per-view, but it was on the Go Home Impact instead. Damn it, is TNA the old guy's legacy nostalgia promotion, or isn't it? Foley served as cheerleader for EV 2.0 in their lethal lockdown match against Fortune at Bound for Glory, then spent the next 2 months off television, only to make a surprise return on the December 23rd episode of Impact. It led to a war of words where Flair blamed Foley for taking things too far in wrestling and inspiring others to foolishly follow in his footsteps, while Foley said he wants to be part of the solution, mentioning he would donate his brain to science when he died, which led to this comeback from the Nature Boy.
When I die, it'll be here or on top of a wild woman.
And to think, I almost witnessed the former of those things happening in Nashville a couple of years ago. Oh, Nate, you card. Foley was gone again after that one-off, finally returning on May 12th as, not a commissioner, he's done that before. No, not a GM, that's too WWE. Oh, how's about network consultant? Do you think Don Callis' ears were burning that night? Foley's reveal was the answer to the question who had been screwing with the Immortal stable for the last several weeks. And while the idea of Foley finally getting into it with Hulk Hogan about 17 years too late seemed enticing, the Hardcore Legend put his own foot in his mouth, no sweat sock. Over on Twitter, The Rocket shared a memory of him beating Mankind in the I Quit match at the 1999 Royal Rumble. Foley, who by this point was frustrated with TNA's operations IRL, joked back with a tweet reminding Rocky that he won the title back in an empty arena match, aka a TNA house show.
It's true, but he shouldn't say it.
As one might expect, Foley got big heat for this faux pas, so he asked for his release. Hogan fired him in kayfabe, which, if he could do that all along, why didn't he fire Foley the moment he found out it was him mucking up his plans? And soon after, Mick Foley was gone from TNA, just 3 months short of 3 years with the company. Let me say it again, I think that Mick Foley's story and his career is one of the most fascinating out there, and even though I never did anything like what he did in the ring, as an aspiring wrestler, I was heavily inspired by his journey. That being said, even the biggest Foley fanatic would have to agree that this run wasn't worthy of even the cheapest of pops. Foley has openly said in interviews that he didn't appreciate his TNA run for what it was, and instead wished it was something it wasn't. Mick no doubt had stars in his eyes and hoped that he could be to TNA what his idol Terry Funk was to ECW, but it was a hopeless situation all around. If his body wasn't the issue, it was often the creative. From quick and half-hearted face and heel turns to the constant digging up of old grudges and storylines, Foley never really got to carve out his own legacy in the company. Obviously, Foley wasn't going to wrestle like it was 92 again, but he still busted his ass and put his body on the line whenever necessary, and even sometimes when it wasn't, so I'll always commend him for that level of dedication. And for my money, there are few in the history of wrestling as consistently entertaining and engaging on the microphone as this man. Mick Foley is a terrific storyteller in and out of the ring, whose last major televised run, though it wasn't perfect, was in many ways still a better closing chapter than his last few years in WWE. In the end, it seemed that Mick told TNA to have a nice day and eventually returned to the good graces of WWE, where he would never have to endure creative embarrassment again. Ah, shit. But what did you think of Mick Foley's time in TNA? Let me know in the comment section below. Stay tuned to next week here on the channel when we go back to TNAville for Bound for Glory 2005. But until then, give the video a thumbs up if you like it, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon for all the notifications. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time. Bang bang!